Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Wilberforce Jahonga, Registrar Galagala National Polytechnic. Now, I was tasked by the project committee, project and business plan committee to do a presentation on chapter 4 for these capacity building workshop, and I hope I make some sense to all of us as we begin this. Now, generally, I expect us to look at data presentation, analysis, and interpretation. And therefore, the key elements that we are going to look at in this presentation will generally be about about analysis. That's the first thing we want to look at, the analysis. So in this analysis, what forms of analysis do you want to use? Are you using percentages? Are you using mean? Are you using a standard deviation? Are you using range? Are you using a linear regression equation? Are you using correlation analysis? And such things. And as you do the analysis, which tools are you using? Many people use SPSS. Some people think of eViews. Others think of Smart PLS. Others use Stata. Others just use basic Excel. And they get whatever data they want. Of course, we know that Excel, for example, has seriously and highly advanced statistical analysis for anything you want, whether it is t-test, or you're talking of the regression analysis and things like that. Then, of course, we look at presentation, what forms, and information about the research findings. So what presentation do you want to give? Sometimes we prefer having a pictorial presentation, in which case you're talking about a chart, a graph, and the like. Then what does the result imply? See, we want to find out what's the meaning of these results. And then at the end of the day, we want to look at the implication. Do these results matter anyway after you have done your analysis? And then finally, what would be your conclusions and your recommendations? Generally, that's what we would want to look at. And so for a better analysis of this chapter, we want to look at how the chapter is organized. If the chapter is organized in a special way, basically we want to say that data must be organized in a very logical way. And if it is organized in a very logical way, then somebody can go through your thoughts and your mind and can appreciate the academic rigor that you have demonstrated on your assignment. And then we are just also saying that when you do your presentation, it may take the form of tables, chart, figures, and these are necessary things for any reader to be able to understand. And we're just saying that it's not necessarily that you include everything in your paper. When our students do this presentation, generally, we know very well that the ability may not be as much as that of, say, a university student, or say taking a degree, a master's degree, or a degree higher than this. So generally, we want to ask and make an assumption that we are dealing with students who are taking certificate and diploma programs, and therefore their presentation should be in such a way that it can encourage them. And that's why we are saying that it is the responsibility for the researcher to tell the reader about what he thinks is very important. Now, as we look at that, it is important also we look at some of the basic things that we need to look at. For example, your style of presentation. How do you present your data? Do you present your results and then you have a discussion, or do you present both of them at the same time, or how do you do that? And of course, we know that this style of presentation is guided by what? The research methodology, which has been discussed ably by my co-presenter on methodology in chapter 3. Just to make an emphasis that when we are making analysis, we must be careful about the unit of analysis. So the unit of analysis generally will be able to tell us exactly what you're after and what you're doing. For example, if I'm looking at the mean, I'm looking at the academic performance between institutions, I may decide to use an individual student, but I may use a class. So if I'm comparing 3 different sets of classes, class A, class B, class C, in this case, I think I would prefer to use the arithmetic mean to be the best tool to get whatever I want. But in this case, the unit of analysis is not the individual in that class. It is the entire class. And when we use the mean, then it means that it is all the individuals in that class. So the class becomes the unit of analysis. Think about it in this way. You have gone to you're doing an economic survey and you want to find out the economic abilities of students and how they are paying their school fees. See, when you're looking at this, then you do not look at a class. Probably you may want to look at the individual student. So the individual student becomes the unit of analysis. Or let me also look at it this way, that you looking at that economic survey and you've gone to individual households. So when you move from family A, family B, family C, until family Z, then the unit of analysis is the individuals in that household. So the household becomes your unit of analysis. So you'd want to compare among households and find out exactly what happens. We know there are some basic rules when we're doing this thing. As we do our presentation of data, we want to ensure that when you're presenting your data, for example, in tables, then where do you put the heading of a table? The heading of a table is usually at the top of that table. And if it's a figure, it's supposed to be at the bottom of that figure. These are just things. Yes, so generally, if I was to look at an overview presentation of chapter 4, I think it would appear something close to this. So how would I start it? And as you can see, this chapter entails data presentation, analysis, and interpretation based on research objectives. The objective of this study was to say, determine, assess, evaluate, all those things, all those words you can use. The effect of COVID-19 on Tibet trainer teaching methodology. But we know that every research with a general objective has specific objectives. So I would also continue by saying that the specific research objectives that provided the field study framework were two, and you can state those many specific objectives. I'm sure you can think about some of the specific objects of such research objective. For me, I think I would think something about transition rates. What necessitated the issues of that brought about transition from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, or module 1 to 2 to 3. And did COVID-19 bring about absenteeism and inability to pay exam fee, inability to pay rent because of lack of jobs and things like that, that brought about now some students now repeating. Our second thing that I would want to present in my chapter 4 would be first now to look at the response rate. So remember, you're doing a study, and probably you've done some study of some sort. You want to find out, for example, if people responded to your questionnaire, and so how many responded, how many did not respond, and if the percentage of presentation is nice, can it therefore become a good representative of your information? The other thing that I would want to do is to have a table to show these results. So the number of questionnaires, for example, whether you completed and returned them, people unable to answer, and things like that, so that at the end of the day, of course, forget about the small errors here, that this can be 100%. Then you also want to discuss about the demographic data. You've gone to the field and you want just to find out about the basic statistics of this information. So some of this demographic data would include age, gender, educational level, marital status, household income, for example, household size, year of study, and you can assist me to get more of these examples. And then I will also further look at now the objectives of your study, because the study has 3 objectives. So what are these objectives? And if I have to go one by one, then I would begin with the first objective by indicating and saying the first objective of the study was to, for example, establish the effect of COVID-19 on student transition rates among college students. So that would be my specific objective. Now, the transition rates indicate the internal efficiency of education institution, blah blah blah. You may wish to say a few things why you think that is important to study something on transition rates. Of course, when you're dealing with the internal efficiency, then you're talking about how resources can be maximally utilized in order to ensure that we get the most out of what little we have. Now, transition rates can be a function of many things. One of the primary indicators of transition rates would be dropout rates, repetition rates, and itself transition rates. And so somebody would want to go through and find out, what did you discuss? What were the dropout rates? How many students were unable to move to second year or to third year because of COVID-19? How many students repeated because they had not studied well? And because they had not studied well, when they did the exams, they failed. And so when they failed, they repeated. And was that a serious thing? And was it significant in your study? And so, and then how many moved from one level to another? Was it 100% transition rate? Was it 50% transition rate? And that is that a big problem? Then those are things you need to discuss, in my considered opinion. And then, of course, if there were many objectives, again, you would state objective 2 like that, with the specific issues you want to look at. Objective 3 with the specific issues you want to discuss. Now, it is important to say that in data analysis, present the results in tables or figures and interpret the results from the questions or the statistical. So you just present the results or tables and interpret the results from the questions, as you can see there. Now, I've done a sample presentation. We know that whenever we present information like this, figures, the title is usually below. and of course you indicate the source of the information. According to APA style of referencing, then whenever you have a figure, then the title is usually below. You can also have another way of presenting the figure. That was a pie chart. Now you have this kind of a bar chart that is conish, and then again, the title is below, as you can see. And then the last example here would be a table. That whenever you're presenting a table here, then the title should be at the top, and then the figures. It may be also important for us to know that whenever we present a table, the APA style also indicates that you have to get this, first two rows and the last. In between, you don't need to indicate those rows. And those are some of the small things that you need to be keen about whenever you present a table. And of course, we know some rules for drawing a table. It must have a comprehensive title. It must have subheadings to indicate, these are subheadings of the various titles, so that you can get meaning out of whatever you presented. And it's just supposed to be self-explanatory, that when I just look at this data, then I get the basics of what it says. Now, why do we use percentages? Because we are saying, remember, if this is has a total about 357 respondents in this study, what we're simply saying that when you express it as like a percentage, then you're able to extrapolate, you're able to give a projection in another larger population sample. So if it was out of 357, for example, it means that in 1,000 respondents, then probably 22% of that population will be using plastic. That's what I will just look at. Then, interpreting results and writing a discussion section, we are saying here that the issue of interpreting means that you have to draw conclusions from your research questions, or if you're using a hypothesis, and therefore it brings a larger meaning. So you have done your analysis, then it must make some sense, and it involves quite a number of things. When we are saying you have to report to the results, how the results address the research questions, or of course giving an extensive description. If we were doing some serious quantitative analysis, then what was the statistical significance of testing, and no confidence level. We're talking of, say, at 95% confidence level, was it significant or not? Those alpha issues. And of course, when you're doing this again, we are careful about type 1 and type 2 errors. But this is not important really for a craft certificate or a diploma certificate student. If you're dealing with these, this may be too advanced for such, but in the event they have to, then we have to be careful about those type 1 and type 2 errors and how it relates to our study. Then we have also said that when you do your discussions, then what we're asking is that you have found out some results. How are these results related to the general knowledge that we know? So do these results show some consistency, or refute or agree with the previous studies? You have to interact with your academic peers. Do these results address the issues of information gap? So you've just found out that, for example, today teachers really can adopt some new way of teaching and doing PowerPoint presentation because of the COVID-19. Most trainers now can use Zoom or conferencing, tools like Kenneth and Zoom and Google Meet. That before then they were not able to. Then do we say that COVID has brought the global world together? These are important things that we need to do. And then how does this finding relate to a general present, presentation in our specific area of study? And we also think that it may also involve discussing theoretical and practical consequences of the results. Theoretical and practical consequences. So when we're talking about theoretical, we're simply saying that did your results talk so much about theoretical underpinning? Does it challenge theory? For example, if you say you're having theory of demand and you came up with something that challenges that theory of demand, where we normally say exception to the law of demand, for example, do you have findings that can challenge that theory? If you're having COVID, for example, and people have done enough samples, and they've said that if you have had the first and the second jab, you may not have a reinfection. So what findings do you have? See, if you have done enough sample tests, you can make some conclusions that may be against what theory says. And therefore, how does it affect the practical issues of how many times I should go for a jab? Is it once or twice or none? That's very important. That as you're discussing, you need just to describe and present all appropriate information produced by your research procedures, of course, and your statistical analysis. That's basically about your results. So, and then, of course, when you do that, ensure that you save the explanation and interpretation of these findings for the discussion section. So when you state the results, just the findings of results or findings, just state the way they are. Then when it comes to discussion, now you can take more time to do the explanation and the interpretation. Of course, presenting the results, use tables, graphs, whatever. It is important that we can also do the same as I've stated earlier, and that when you do that, you only look for salient issues, because you can have so much information and not everything is necessary for explanation. Why we use tables is for visualization. We make use of tables and charts and percentages so that we can just make a clear interpretation. So if you have so many items, you can only state what you think is so salient about your finding. And then, as I said, the data may have so much amount of raw data, so you can't just present everything. We just present what you think is very important. I think basically that's what I've just said here. And then the day you may wish to look at why is discussion session important. Of course, the first one, it would wish to demonstrate your ability as a researcher in terms of your critical approach, your philosophical and intellectual exposure to the specific thing that you're doing. And so that's very important in your discussion. Then, of course, it explores the underlying meaning of your study, of your research. It is possible that implications of other areas of study and the possible improvements that can be made in order for somebody to do some further research, get a new way of doing it, a theoretical approach, get an empirical approach. So basically, those two things are very important when you have a discussion. You look at the theory, and then you look at the empirical view. And then, of course, whether it has addressed any gap in the literature, in the businesses that you have drawn. Then how does your result bring about, issues of gaps in the general literature? I think maybe this may be too advanced for a certificate student and even probably a diploma student, but generally those are the things. And therefore it also therefore gives you an opportunity to show your prowess in your critical thinking. Generally we expect that when you have done a good chapter 4, then do not be repetitive, just make your points so clear. Do not use jargons to show how you are learned. I discovered in this world really it's not how much you pronounce your English, but it's how much you put across the important things that matter in life. It's how much you, and not just how much you put those things that matter in life, but how many are able to appreciate those important things. So the simpler you make it, the better. But of course, whether it had a logical thought and presentation, how use of sentence, past, present, whatever, then do not just introduce new things in your finding in your study. You have just done your concluding, then you make a conclusion that is outside your objectives. Please, those are things that you need just to be careful about.